Deputy Kenny.
Thanks, I'm a deputy for Dublin North East constituency, which includes the area covered by the Dublin North East Drugs Taskforce, and I'm well aware of the work they do in Darndale and Kilbarrack and Needmore, and I've had dealings with your people before. You raised some of the questions that, I think Darndale was mentioned as an area where you have a particular group, the Dales, dealing with the kind of antisocial behaviour that arising from crime and from the drug addiction problem. Do you come across cases of people who actually have to leave their homes, just leave the area because of intimidation by local crime gangs? And I just want to know, I've come across one or two cases myself. Very often the people involved, as has been said, are afraid to put their heads above the parapet, and you get a situation where the victim doesn't get recourse because they're not willing to come forward and give evidence to the guards, and that's something that I think needs to be. And I'd like to hear your views on that as people who are working on the ground. Particularly, I was particularly interested in the submission made by Anna Quigley, and you mentioned the community policing forums and the local safety forums that are they're in my constituency, and I'm sure they're probably in the inner city even more so. You mentioned that it may not be getting the priority that it did get in the past, and I think that's a point that's as well made. But the local authorities under housing legislation have a role to play in dealing with criminals, or crime gangs who are living in local authority estates. And I'd like to know, do you think that the local authority is doing enough in relation to housing management and estate management in tackling that kind of low-level criminal activity, intimidation? We hear in the news of the high-level shootings, and they make the news, but the everyday kind of low-level intimidation that annoys people intensely and makes life unbearable for them is really the kind of problems that are more prevalent, and I think you have addressed that. And I'd just like to hear your views on on what the local authorities could do, or if there's need for more legislation on that. And I have just one final question.
We'll get the answer to that question first. I'll come back
to
you.
Sure. Okay.
Who wants to come in on that particular issue there that Deputy Kenny brought up? Anybody want to respond to that? Ms. Quigley, briefly.
Yeah, just on the local authorities, again, obviously they do have a role, and in a lot of areas, certainly now in the north inner city, the council and the guards work very closely together around issues where someone is living in a local authority accommodation and is causing difficulty, intimidation of neighbours and so on. It's very difficult because, and it's back to what Deputy McGrath was talking about, the council is clear they will proceed if they have evidence, but the difficulty is in terms of how you gather the evidence and the extent of fear people have around providing the evidence. The legislation too is very complicated because in the end of the day there are the issues around people's right to a home, and if you evict them they will need to be housed somewhere else, which is an issue that remains. But I mean, I suppose the fundamental issue underneath a lot of this is that there are legal systems there are laws, there are justice structures, there's pleading. The fundamental point, I suppose, is if people are too afraid to come forward, as you described, Deputy McGrath, people are too afraid to come forward and give the evidence. There is a process by which people can be evicted from council housing. It's a difficult and long process, and that's right. I mean, nobody should be evicted easy from the home. But the real issue is they must act on evidence that's given to them by other residents, and that is where the difficulty is, people's fear of giving that evidence. And I think it's back to what Deputy McGrath said about an answer to it. The reality is, there is no instant answer to that. You can't say to any individual, and nobody will, even the police won't say to an individual, I'll advise you to ignore that person who's intimidating you and go ahead. And the police will not advise anyone to ignore someone who's intimidating them. Sometimes they advise them, look, you're better off to pay. That's the reality. If you can get the money, pay them. Because none of us can say to someone that we could protect you from a person who's intimidating you. So in that immediate case, it is very, very difficult for people. And that's why all of the other things we talked about, need to work together, because the only way we're going to change that, we can't offer any, even though you'd want to, anyone who comes in as a TD to you and says, I need help, you want to be able to say to them, that I can give you that. At the moment, we can't say to anybody, if you come forward and identify the people who are intimidating you, you come forward and name them in court and you'll be protected. We can't actually say that. And that's why we've got to look at all of the things we've all listed. All of them working together is the only way. But we do have to start with supports for those people. Like, we don't just say, well, go away, we can't do anything. You have to say, look, at the moment you're stuck in this, at least provide them with support, at least provide them with some kind of local service, local structure where they can go. And yes, the police, I mean, the policing is crucially important in terms of both the community policing, because there is an issue and comes up all the time in areas where there's a lot of intimidation. People say they do not see the police on the streets, they don't walk in those areas. There's often a sense, and we've heard this, that if there's surveillance going on around the drugs issue, for example, that the normal policing is withdrawn from the streets because they want to get on with the surveillance. Now, you can understand that, but it's not acceptable. It's not acceptable that policing is withdrawn from the streets. And I know, again, it's the issue of resources. I know in Store Street, for example, they're down 65 guards from a couple of years ago. They have 65 less. I mean, that's bound to have an impact, and I'm sure that's replicated in other areas. You need a visible police force, just visible, patrolling what they used to do. They don't patrol anymore, because that is part of giving people reassurance as well. There has to be visibility. I mean, I know that the previous Minister for Justice referred, we don't need that kind of policing anymore because we've got technology, computers. You have to have visible police. People have to see the police. Yeah, sorry, back to the original point. Yeah, no, I think that, I mean, it really, I don't think at this stage it's about more processes or procedures or laws, because we still have to get over that basic point that if people don't feel they're in a position to give evidence, that is really where the debate. It's not saying that it doesn't happen in some cases, it does, but it is very difficult.
Another question?
Again, I want to agree strongly with the point that's been made by a number of speakers about the need for a junior minister dealing with this whole drug task force area. I mean, Alex White was the minister dealing with it before. Going back to Pat Rabbitte, who was the first minister, I think, and there has been a number of ministers since then who have been who are particularly focused on that particular area. And I think we need to go back, and I think the message that you're giving is that you want to see that position reinstated. I was interested in the point made by the speaker here from the Association for Criminal Justice Research and Development in relation to providing a safe environment, where people can actually come forward and give their views. And I think you mentioned that really you need a Garda presence with feet on the ground in order to make people feel safe, so that they can come forward and give that, give the information that will lead to some kind of a resolution of these problems. One hopes that when these new extra Gardaí become available and are trained, that will release more guards who can go back to doing the kind of work that was previously done in that area. That's my final question. Yeah.
Okay.
I did ask a question earlier about the cases of where people have to leave their homes.
Yes, I mean, does anybody want to come up with that? Mr. Goff, yeah.
Yeah, I think we certainly work with people, and sometimes it's complete families have to leave their homes,
yes,
or often it's members of their family, which can be heartbreaking for families when they have to send their children away for their own safety. But and even then, if people often say, well, no, I'm not leaving my home, and are very proud to stay there. They're very often living in fear. And again, kind of back to what Anna was saying earlier, it's difficult to report that, and people live in fear. Their windows are broken, and you can't. They won't go to the Gardaí. So those crimes are not reported. They receive, beatings, not enough maybe to bring them to hospital, but enough to hurt them and do serious damage. So again, they won't report that. So this information is going unreported, and the statistics are down as well as a result of it, but it's happening, and it's very real for people. And as Anna said, the situation is you know not to go any further. If your son gets a bad beating, then you're definitely not going to report that.
Okay, Ms. McKenna, you wanted to come in as well?
Just to add to that, what Dermot said, within the traveller community, people have had to leave their homes as well. And that would be between travellers and travellers, but it would also between travellers and other gangs and within the wider community. And it has happened, it does happen, and there is no reporting as such of it.